Welcome to Money River News this week. I'm Bob Goff. My guest today is Chad Dewaard. He is the chairman of the Civic Engagement and Leadership Department at Culver-Stockton College. He's also a professor, but that includes poli-sci and history and a few other things, right?
That's right. Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a long time coming, so I'm glad we finally connected.
Yeah, no, I'm glad we could do that too. And again, fresh off the heels of the Missouri primary, we're going to talk more about the national stuff and kind of the broad strokes. But since the Missouri primary is recent, we'll kind of get that knocked out of the way. The most fascinating part of the primary, I still think, well, the governor's race, sure, but I still think the first district congressional race between Bush and Bell was something that I was following and I was very interested in, and not surprised to see Cori Bush take the loss.
Yeah, not exactly a surprise either. I mean, she's been hounded. A lot of money came into her opponent, AIPAC, lit her up a little bit, and farewell.
Yeah, she was pretty defiant in her remarks last night, so we'll see if she tries to make a political comeback in the future. But that governor's race, when you look at it, were you surprised? I mean, when you've got a legacy dynasty politician's last name in Ashcroft, were you surprised? Who is also currently the sitting Secretary of State, which means his name is out all over everywhere.
That's right.
Were you surprised to see his poor showing?
Well, I was. However, I've noticed that over the last few weeks or so that Kehoe and other challengers were making a rise, and they'd been about the state and leveraging, kind of a contrary argument, and paid off.
Kehoe was really he didn't attend a couple of debates. Eigel was kind of the firebrand. He's made he and our senator from Northeast Missouri, Cindy O'Loughlin, who's also the majority leader. Yeah. They haven't exactly seen eye to eye on issues.
That's true.
But Kehoe was really one to say he seems like he wants to be a guy who tamps it down a little bit.
A little bit, yeah, absolutely. I think there's room for a little bit of moderation in the mix. But after all, this is a primary, and the primary caters to the base.
You talk about that, though. Are you expecting to see any of that in this presidential race we now have?
Absolutely, I do. As a matter of fact, Trump can't help himself but go to the base. Often there are, from a political scientist perspective, there are missteps that make me cringe, unforced errors. His challenge to Harris's racial identity. Just a couple days ago in Georgia, he lashes out against the Georgia governor, Brian Kemp, who's popular, takes a shot at Lee in Tennessee. And I watch these things and I think, stay on focus. Stay on the issues, define your position as opposed to Harris's position. And let's not mudsling. Let's try to avoid that as best as possible. He's throwing red meat to the base. And, of course, the base eats that up. That's fine. But when it comes to a general election that will likely be decided in just a handful of states, among independents as well, avoiding the ridicule, I think, is important. I think staying disciplined is important. And I don't know if Trump can do that.
We had the assassination attempt.
Right.
And we thought, many people thought, oh, boy, this is something that can change a guy.
Absolutely.
And it did for, what, a week?
Yeah. Maybe the first 10 minutes of the RNC, he was a bit maybe even conciliatory, unifying even. And about after 15, 20 minutes into a 90-minute speech, he went back to the original playbook. It kind of reminds me of the 2016 race, but the political landscape has changed quite a bit. He's not facing Hillary Clinton, who was disliked, considerably disliked, and the country has moved past some of those things that Trump tends to emphasize. He's still denying, rejecting the outcome of the 2020 election. If I'm a young voter and I'm listening to Trump, I have to imagine that they think to themselves, is this election about him, or is it about the nation? Is he going to speak to me? Or is he going to reject some of those facts that have been established?
It appears to me that, and again, I think that when they had the debate and the president struggled as badly as he did,
We're talking about Joe Biden,
the current president, Joe
Yeah,
Biden.
all those qualifiers, former president.
We've got this history making thing where a former president's against a current president.
The last few weeks have been crazy, and so keeping up with all those qualifiers, I just go with last names anymore.
I think I've watched more CNN in the last month than I've watched in probably the last year. Combined. Because again, I try. Again, you've got Fox and MSNBC,
right,
and then CNN
kind of cancel each other out.
Yeah, and I know CNN. And again, I think the thing about CNN was the fact that they were very much, a lot of the people who are have partisan backgrounds on there were like, okay, President Biden's got to go. Right. And then soon as the vice president ascended in the party, they all really began waving the pom poms.
Yeah, absolutely. There has been a Harris hype. You heard it here first. I don't know if that's been coined. That's easy, right? A Harris hype. There's a bit of a honeymoon.
But it's Kamala. Make sure we pronounce it properly.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I struggle with that, and I don't want to. I'm
not trying to be I'm not trying to be a jerk either. But sometimes I do too. It's not a name that's very familiar to me.
So I think about it a couple times before I say it. I'm thinking, okay.
I saw it as comma law, and it's like that's how I remember it now.
Right.
And it's like, okay,
right. We don't want to perpetuate. We don't want to perpetuate the misnaming her on purpose and all that kind of stuff. So
because he's got all these goofy names for everybody.
Crazy,
and
Kamala,
it's just like, come on, man.
Crash, Kamala, and all that stuff.
Again, like you said, some of us thought maybe for a minute we were going to have this new tone, and then and of course, you're going to be outraged when somebody tries to assassinate a former president, regardless of your party and your beliefs. It's like, hey, this is not how we do things. But then now that I really believe that the Biden, how was the Trump campaign seems to have been caught off guard and not prepared that Kamala Harris is now the nominee when all the tea leaves said Joe Biden is not going to be the nominee.
Right. There are several layers here. I'm not sure which to take first. I don't think the Republican Party necessarily was caught off guard. I think maybe they're on their back foot with some of the sensationalism that has surrounded Harris. She's had a good couple of weeks.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, she's transitioned well. I'll give credit where credit is due. The Democrats rallied quickly behind her. They prioritize unity. The money is flowing in. She's adopted, if you will, less is more to some of Trump's intemperate responses or statements, declarations. And so she's been, if you will, disciplined, a bit on message, but she still really hasn't come out on the political landscape in a forceful way.
Right.
As far as I'm concerned. And we'll have to wait and see if that happens, because she right now is riding high and has the wind at her sails, but there's 90 days to the election. And I think the more her record is exposed, the more comfortable Republicans will feel about their chances and winning the election.
When you look at this race and you see a lot of the discussion is also about how the Democrats went about this. I think the thing that when people talk about how this was some kind of coup or whatever, or how did she get this, her name was on that ballot in all those primaries too.
That's correct. And she has seniority. She is, in a manner of speaking, an incumbent. It would have been wrong for the Democrats to pass her over.
Yeah.
However, I think the party and the nation would have benefited from more of a primary contest, if you will, if the convention had been contested a bit. I think that would have tested her, because she's really taken the inside track to the White House. I mean, she had a great career in California, U.S. Senator, Attorney General, all that great stuff. But her foray into national politics lasted about 9 minutes.
Yeah,
when she ran in 2020. Yeah. Now, she said enough then for the Trump campaign to be pretty eager about going after her with decriminalizing illegal immigration, her association with defund the police, her position against fracking, you name it. They've got some ammunition to use. Now, whether or not they're going to be able to define her before she defines herself. Her campaign understands this 2020 issue, if you can call it that, and they're already out ahead of it, moderating her tone, 4 years back and so on. But to circle back, she was the necessary candidate in my estimation, for the Democrats.
I think so too, because I think had they, had the Newsoms, Whitmers, Pritzkers et al. Decided, no, we want to throw our hats in too, and you would have had no pun intended here, an apprentice-style event to go into into the convention. Yeah. Then there's the gripe that, well, we didn't vote for this. It's all the power brokers and poobahs who are doing this. Again, my contention is when I've had friends of mine say, well, she didn't. There were 14 million people when they cast that vote for Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. They know that there's a good chance that she's going to end up being president, because I don't think anybody that supported Biden thought there's no way this guy's going to last 4 years, even before the debate.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So
you're right. And she did secure the delegates. They had that virtual conference last week, and so there is some indirect democracy, if you want to call it that, at play here. And so. Again, I give credit to the Democrats for just being on their game and getting up to speed. She's made up ground that was lost by Joe Biden. Her favor, but she's still underwater. Right. But 2 weeks ago, her unfavorable ratings were abysmal, and now they're maybe a point or two ahead of Trump. It's a dead heat in the battleground states, in those 7 battleground states. But she has made considerable progress without really doing a hell of a lot. I mean,
the one thing she has done is she has picked a VP, and that's Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. What are your thoughts about that selection?
I was a little bit surprised, but I got J.D. Vance wrong too. I probably shouldn't have got Vance wrong. I will just to have a conversation here. My choice for Trump would have been Nikki Haley, but that wouldn't have been Trump's choice, and clearly wasn't Trump's choice. They don't really like each other, but I would have thought that would have been a nice balance, to kind of bring back the stridency, and kind of approach the middle ground a little bit more. A Haley nomination would have reassured our allies and our friends overseas. It would have added the traditional mainstream Republicans to the fold. Would have even attracted some independents and swing voters too. But Trump doubled down on MAGA. By and large, Vance is a bit of a legacy pick, and I was a little surprised too, because in political science we typically think about balancing the ticket.
Sure.
You do it geographically, you do it ideologically. You might do it racially in this case. Right, and both candidates seem to do more of a philosophical symmetry, if you will. And so Vance and Trump are of like mind on a lot of matters. Far right, if you're okay with that. And Harris and Walz are similarly disposed. And so I really thought that Harris might take a more traditional approach to balancing the ticket and go with Shapiro, Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is the big
electoral
daddy.
Math,
19 electoral votes. Yeah.
Electoral math says go Shapiro.
Right.
But
he's got his problems.
Well,
of course, and we can talk about that if you want.
We've got his problems, but I think the biggest problem is he's Jewish.
The right seems to want to underscore that.
Yeah, it looks like that there was a lot of that discussion. It's like, I mean, they can't do this because they have to appease that wing of their party, and it's like, okay, but if you don't win, then what does it matter?
Then you'll come back and you'll second guess that decision to go with Walz for sure. I would have thought. We don't typically, as political scientists, put a heck of a lot of stock in the VP choice. Sure. Folks vote for the top of the ticket. Yeah. However, when the margins are so tight, and Pennsylvania seems like the key, pardon the pun, Keystone State, all that kind of stuff, seems so fundamentally important to any successful electoral map victory. Even a bump of a half a point, 3/4 of a point, or a point in Pennsylvania could be the difference. And back to your Jewish point, I don't think that's off the mark. I think that it has more to do with his rather hawkish pro-Israeli stand.
Yes, agreed. Yes, yeah. More so than just so than just being Jewish.
Yeah, and that's problematic in Michigan and Wisconsin,
right?
For those Democrat voters,
circling back to Vance for a minute, though. When you talk about balancing the ticket, I think the other thing that balances the ticket is the age there too.
That's a great point.
I mean,
That's a great
and
point.
if Trump is looking for his MAGA successor and his kids really liked him, that's what they want.
Yep.
But just knowing and watching Donald Trump over the last decade or so, and I'm just discounting everything he did with Home Alone 2 and all that stuff, but just over the last decade, I just can't see him as a kind of guy of a temperament who's going to forgive a guy who called him Hitler one time.
Right.
That blows my mind.
Right.
I just figured that was when they said Vance, I'm like, wait a minute. I remember Vance being an anti-Trumper, and then everything came out what he said. I'm like, how does Donald Trump do that? Because it just doesn't seem like that's in his DNA.
Don't have an answer.
I stumped the professor.
Yeah. We want to win the election,
Yeah.
and we think Vance is the best partner on the ticket.
When we talked earlier about the tone and Kehoe wanting to get hate politics out, and then we see all the stuff coming out about Vance now, and everybody's like, oh, he's the left's coming after him now, and now
So is the right,
and now the right's coming after him. Now Walz is getting all this heat about his National Guard record and stuff that's already starting to trickle out, and it's like, at some point, could we just have the substantive policy discussions, or is that only things that wonks like you and I want?
I wish we had more of that. I believe that there are several thousands of serious independent swing voters who are hungry for that. And I'm struggling to come up with a smart way of saying this. Until we demand it, we probably won't get it, right? When I look at national politics, I often think to myself, oh, we get what we pay for.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate. And until there's transparency, there's really no accountability, and until we demand it, we're probably not going to get it. Now back to Waltz, real quick. I think his biggest hang-ups will be presiding over the riots in Minneapolis and the city burning. His association with defund the police, and also the COVID lockdown. Minnesota was kind of draconian, a little bit like Illinois when it came to COVID, and Americans think that stinks.
Yeah.
And so I think that'll hurt him. What really helps him, I think, is that while he might be, Republicans will call him radical, he certainly has supported liberal progressive policies, but he cuts a shape of a bit of a moderate. He's kind of an everyday guy.
He's an NRA member.
Yeah, and he's a hunter. He owns a gun. He does those things that we typically attribute to conservatives, and so he has a personality, I think, that transcends left and right. But when it comes to votes, he's progressive.
Yeah, and I think that's, and again, I think that's. I wish we could talk about that without all of the crap. And I wish we could, when people look at states like Illinois and Minnesota, I guess you look at the country, and when people show the map and the blue dots and the red, and everybody would say, "Oh my God!" And it's like, well, these grass and these lakes and these trees and these cows don't vote, but this is where the people are. And you try to look at that, and it's like, I just wonder if there's any way that we can get some sort of calming of the temperature to just have some discussions without the name. We're never going to get it as long as Trump's around, because that's just what he does. He's a name calling bully. So what are we going to? How do we go about getting that, though? To get a couple of if Mike Kehoe sticks to his word and he doesn't run a bunch of nasty ads on Crystal Quaid in the Missouri governor's race, and it's like, wow, Mike Kehoe ran a great, nice, clean race. How can we get something like that to translate on a national level?
Right. I think you may have answered your own question.
I'm smart like that.
I think November 5 could be a gateway to restraining some of the antagonism in American politics. I say that with reservation. The MAGA movement in a lot of ways started before Trump. He's the mouthpiece, and it will likely continue after him, as so long as so many Americans believe that they're dismissed, feel alienated from the system.
The MAGA movement, do you believe, is a descendant of the Tea Party movement?
I think their roots are there. I just don't think that Trump necessarily inspired it. I think he's perpetuated the antipathy, if you will, from the right to the federal government, and he's lashed onto it. Trump's a populist first and an opportunist second, and he'll move. He's, as he calls himself, a deal maker, and so he's unpredictable. He's not exactly philosophically
he's never
consistent.
the guy that anybody would have thought of been a pro-life champion, that's for sure.
Right.
And look at the judges he appointed. And
yeah, and that's a smart political move in a number of ways.
Yeah.
So he can learn.
You mentioned November 5th, though. Maybe. You mentioned November 5th, but don't you think it's all probably going to come down to January 6th again?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I mean, I'm sure the Capitol Police will be a little more reinforced this time, but
right.
we all know that should Donald Trump come in on the short end, it was rigged and he didn't lose.
Yeah, the groundwork has already been laid for that, unfortunately.
So I think, I think until Donald Trump leaves the political scene, I just think we're stuck with this. And then the Republican Party has to figure out, how do we rebuild after this?
How do we reconstitute? How do we become the party that we once were?
Yeah.
And I don't know how long. That's probably a generational thing, more than likely. But the old guard, if you will, the mainstream, they've been put out to pasture in a lot of ways. And a Trump White House, those moderates, those traditional conservatives, they're not going to have the ear of the White House that they had in 2016. In 2016, when Trump became president, he had a cabinet and advisors who were still connected to traditional Republican roots, and now the party has just moved. It's dominated by Trump. It's his party.
Yeah, no question about it. Professor Chad Dewaard, thank you very much. I
Hey,
appreciate this chat.
it's been great.
We will do it again.
Let's do it again.
That was
Appreciate
awesome.
it, Bob.
All right. It's all the time we have for now. This has been Muddy River News this week. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.